Greetings, my friends. This is Sid Graff with the 80/20 Service Business Podcast, and I'm very excited today to have my good friend Perry Marshall on the show. And primarily, those of you that are just listening to audio, you won't see it. I'm holding up a copy of one of Perry's books. It's an 80/20 Sales and Marketing book they published a while ago. Let me tell you just a little bit about Perry and give you a good introduction before we get started and dig in. Perry is, among many things, he's a best-selling author. I just showed you the 80/20 Sales and Marketing book. The first book that kind of came on the market that gave Perry a name was The Ultimate Guide to AdWords. Then he had The Ultimate Guide to Facebook Advertising. And he has several other books, but most recent book he published is Evolution 2.0, and that's breaking the deadlock between Darwin and design, which is fascinating, by the way. And unfortunately, that doesn't get to be the topic of this show. We're going to focus on the 80/20 principle. I have to tell you that the best of my understanding, Perry has gone in his professional life from being a struggling industrial business-to-business sales guy and a self-professed Amway Kool-Aid drinker to one of the perhaps most prominent, definitely one of the more influential internet marketers and online and offline business coaches and consultants. He has a great consultancy and a number of programs to help small business and medium businesses go from 0 to $1 million, $1 million to 10 million, 100 million. It's not all about the dollar signs, but it's about running your business in a way that supports and serves you. Perry, you're also a husband and a dad of six.
Mm-hmm.
Six, right? Okay. Perry is a deep thinker and a deeply spiritual man, an average dancer, a bona fide, I've seen him dance, and a bona fide audio speaker geek, and a good friend.
I dance like an insurance salesman from Cleveland. I would say I am a below average dancer, but yes, I'm an audio geek.
What was the gal's name from Seinfeld? Elaine? Bat, bat, bat. That's the dancing thing. But thanks for being on the show, Perry. I'm delighted to have you on. And
I'm glad to talk. I always enjoy talking to Sid. So we can't help but have a good time. So
very good. What did I miss in the introduction?
Oh, that's good. My 6 kids are 2 adopted and 4 standard issue. So I got both kinds.
Yeah. Good. What are their age ranges? I think
9 to 23.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so that means how many teenagers do I have? 1, 2, 3 teenagers and a 21 and a 23. Yeah, right. So, it's a whole different deal when your kids are basically young adults instead of, when they were 3 years old, they were adorable, but getting them out the door with their shoes on was just skull-crushingly difficult. Now it's, you can talk to them about all of these interesting things, and they have opinions, and they're colorful, and they have these crazy adventures, and I just think having older kids is the bomb. I think it's great.
It is a lot of fun. My oldest son Michael is 25. When he moved out of the house for a while, he does live at home now. Remember once when he was living on his own, he came over and we were having coffee at the house, and he just stopped and looked at me and he's like, "Dad, you are so much cooler now that I don't live at home."
Imagine that.
Anyway, so what let's do today? We're definitely going to focus on the 80/20 principle and how people can apply it to their life and to their business. But first, I'm looking at my weird notes, and I don't know if they're appropriate anymore after our chat earlier. But first, you've had several iterations in your career, and even now you're on a strong trajectory of change. What I wanted to find out is, with you personally, and it kind of the theme of 80/20, is there a common theme or principle or value that has served you or even catalyzed a lot of your growth?
Well, yeah, and it's the principle that there are a few principles. I think that life is incomprehensibly complicated if you think that it is just a long series of complicated transactions that all, seemingly disconnected events just strung together. If you can orient yourself towards the idea that there are a few principles of how things work, and that if you understand those principles, you can figure out everything else from there, then it dramatically simplifies everything. And it brings cohesion. And the reason that I wrote 80/20 Sales and Marketing was that I suddenly realized that 80/20 wasn't one of these little techniques that, like, on shelf number 551, that when we're doing business spreadsheets, this might come in handy. It wasn't one of those kinds of things. It was the central law of cause and effect of everything.
Yeah. That sums it up. Thanks for the show. No.
Well, yeah. Well, see, that's just it. See, like, we could stop. And if you're willing to really think about what that means, like, that's all we would need to say. But of course, we will try to unpack it more. But it's a really big deal. And the thing about principles is you have to meditate on them and soak in them for a while. You never grasp the significance of a true principle like all at once.
Yeah.
That's just not how they are. And so it requires a certain amount of patience.
Yeah.
In the application. But when I realized what a big deal this was, it was like a giant epiphany, and my head set on fire. And I haven't stopped thinking about it since. It became a central pillar of how I think about everything.
Okay. Do you recall when that was?
Yeah, I recall exactly when it was. It was in 2003, and I bought the book, The 80/20 Principle by Richard Koch, who a friend said, "Oh, you have to read this book." So I'm reading this book, and I'm at Buzz Cafe in Oak Park, Illinois, sitting in a coffee shop, drinking some Joe, and reading this book. And I get to page 14, and Richard says, 80/20 has a lot to do with chaos theory and fractals. And then he just goes on. He doesn't say anything more about it. I go, hey, wait a minute. So I had studied that. It's a very fascinating little rabbit hole to go down. And chaos theory says that there are patterns inside of patterns, inside of patterns, inside of patterns. And that the patterns at every scale, they resemble each other. So out my window, there's a tree, okay? And the tree has a branching pattern, but I can zoom into a limb, zoom into a branch, zoom into a twig, zoom into a leaf, zoom in on the veins of the leaf, all the way down to the cellular level, and I'll see branching, 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 branching. Like, I don't know how many levels of branching there are in a tree. Right. I don't know if it's 20 or 30 or 50, but that branching pattern, that's fractal, okay? And when Richard said that, I go, see, I knew all that. I already had a whole background. Wait a minute. If that's true, then there's an 80/20 inside every 80/20. And then there's another one inside of that one. And then there's another one inside of that one, which means there's levers inside of levers inside of levers, which means, hey, wait a minute. This isn't just like sales numbers and property ownership. So the Pareto principle, where this all started, was Vilfredo Pareto in Italy was an economist, and he was studying all these different countries, and everywhere he looked, it didn't matter what country he studied, 20% of the people had 80% of the wealth.
Yeah.
And they could be a socialist country, they could be a capitalist country. It was still always true. And he's like, oh, okay. And then I heard about it a long time ago in my sales job. And I printed out a sales report and I went through it with a calculator, and like I'll be darned, by the time I get 20% of the way through the sales report, starting from the biggest customers, working down to the smallest, 20% of the way in, I've got 80% of the money.
Yeah.
Okay. But now if this is fractal, this means this is in all my spreadsheets. This is the traffic on all the roads in my town. It's the size of the cities in Iceland, and it's the traffic on the dirt on my carpet going through my living room, that 20% of the carpet has 80% of the dirt, and 20% of the rooms have 80% of the time that people spend in them. And this goes on and on. And I jumped up. I was like, wait a minute, I got to check this out. And so I jumped up, I got in my car, I drove home, and I got out all these pieces of paper and a calculator. I'd been in business for about 1.5 years. And I was like, okay, so if this is true, I will already see 80-20 happening in this fledgling little business where I got a couple of clients, and I've been selling some stuff over here, and I've been sending out these mailers, and I look at it, it was like, it was all true.
Yeah.
And I'm laying in the floor with all these papers scattered all over and my wife comes home and she goes, what happened to you? Like, Laura, I just had this crazy epiphany. And then from that point forward, I became this 80-20 evangelist. And so to give you an example, at the time, right at that point, I had been experimenting with Google ads for 1 year. Okay. And I had gotten reasonably good. And that's only good from the perspective of how good anybody was in 2003 at Google ads, right? It was this new weird thing. Okay, but I thought, hey, wait a minute. All Google advertising is ruthless application of 80-20 to every single column and every single factor in a Google account. So, and so I figured out that 5% of the keywords get you 95% of the traffic. And 1% of the ads get 50% of the traffic. And that you don't have to optimize all this stuff. That would be like polishing turds.
Right.
You optimize like this tiny fraction, and it's almost complete. You can optimize 95% of a Google account by working on less than 10% of it.
Okay. Yeah. So what are the keys to, like, how do you identify the 20%? Because or in this case, and you've talked a lot about it, it's like the world is no longer 80-20, it's 95-5. The lever is bigger. The part that matters more, and the part that doesn't matter matters less. How do you identify the part that's really important?
Well, so in the rear view mirror, you can always identify what was important. Okay. Sure. So if you run any numbers on anything, if I run the population of cities in the United States, or if I run, the number of kids that's got scholarships to the University of Nebraska, all of that stuff is 80-20. And you like in any spreadsheet, you sort a column from top to bottom. And most of the time in most businesses, it's going to be 80% is in the 80% of the stuff, product defects or product lines or whatever, is going to be in the top 20% of the column in the spreadsheet. And then you look at, you go, well, and 20% of the 20% produces 80% of the 80%. So that means 2/3 comes from 4%.
Yeah.
And so that means there's huge levers. It means that most of your product defects or your customer complaints or your support tickets are from a very small handful of problems.
Yeah.
And if you can machine gun the top 3 problems, you don't need to worry about the other 97. You can go do something else, but you have to machine gun these 3. But then it also changes your view of the future, because you know before you do anything that the outcome will be 80-20. You know, if you hire 10 sales guys, I guarantee you that 20% of them will get 80% of the sales by the time you add up all their sales. And we know this in advance before you hire the 10 guys, before you know who the 10 guys are, before you decide how you're going to pick the 10 guys, it's going to be true, right? So there's always going to be these inequalities. Well, if you know in advance that you need to be keeping 3 of them and firing 7, well, that changes your whole mentality to the whole thing. First of all, when you hire them, maybe instead of giving the impression that, well, you know, this company is like a big family and we just love everyone, you know, how about before you tell them any of that stuff, how about you tell them, so we have this 2-month screening period and nobody's actually considered a full-time employee of this company until we get through the 2-month trial. And we know that most people are not going to end up being a match. And you know what? That's really okay. I don't judge you. Like, if you don't work out as a salesperson, I don't think you're a bad guy. It just means you didn't work out for this job, right?
Right.
And like, you take the pressure off. It makes you look at everything from a disqualification lens.
Yeah.
Like, well, let's just find out, should you even be here in the first place?
So you just take that particular example of hiring sales guys, and that's not what the show's about, but we have a couple of disqualifying. We try to screen out that 80% before they even come on board. And then we call it for our technicians, it's the 2-week working interview. So they know at the end of 2 weeks, they might get a job offer, but they're getting paid, and that's fine. But even in the sales, you know, when we're hiring for sales guys, I learned this from a friend of mine. He said, one of the questions they ask, he said, we have 2 compensation models. One is you get a salary plus bonus, or the other is straight commission. And he said, if anybody says, I want the salary plus bonus, they don't hire them.
Yeah.
Instant disqualification. You're a sales guy. You got to fight, right? So
those are both great. The 2-week working interview, that's great. And then what you just described is a rack the shotgun question.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So let's see. I've got 3 other questions I want to ask you. I want to make sure we get time for everything. One of the things that you hit on early on, like your epiphany moment, or like when the light shone on 80-20, one of the goals of the show, as I mentioned earlier in our email, was that I really want people to start seeing and thinking 80-20 in their life. Because as you mentioned, and we've had this conversation, once you see it, you really can't unsee it. And then try to reverse engineer what you can extrapolate from the past and forecast it and go, okay, how can I only really focus on the things that matter? Now, we had a conversation first time we met. I don't know if you recall it, but it had to do with the Protestant work ethic. And my mojo at the time was, I'm a farm boy. I do everything. And you're like, you didn't say it in these words, but you basically said, you need to get over that shit. You've got to get to the point where you do what's important and let somebody else do everything else. Like, what are the, like, so this, we're going to, for the sake of time, we're going to shift. We just got 2 questions. One is going to be tactical. That's next. And this one is more of a subterranean belief level. So how can people, and why is it important for them to utilize, like, view 80-20 on a belief level? So like you have a seismic shift. Like, how can you change what's in your head? Because I find that most of the time, that's the issue. It's not, you know, looking at a spreadsheet going, where does most of my revenue come from? It's going, what do you believe in your head? My belief was, I'm a farm boy. I have to do everything myself. The day I got over that, my workload cut by, I worked a third of the hours and I made twice as much money. And then I instantly felt guilty about it. But I got over that. They're like, okay, now we're getting somewhere.
So my brother-in-law lived in Brazil in the 90s, and they got servants.
Yeah.
And now my brother-in-law is from Iowa and I'm from Nebraska, and people in Iowa and Nebraska do not have servants. Nobody, right? maybe in Manhattan or Silicon Valley, but not, not in Minnesota, right? Well, and certainly not in Montana. Well, so my Alan explained to me, he goes, look, we're in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We're not in Nebraska. And like, we can hire this maid and she'll like scrub our house, like exquisitely clean for like $200 a month. And to her, $200 a month is a small fortune. And like, she can send her kids to school and she can do all this and she can have a nice life. It makes total sense. And I was like, oh, okay, well, you're in a foreign country and you're running this company down there. And okay, that mean they were actually not exactly, but they were sort of like kind of missionaries, actually. He was running a publishing house. So it was really weird for them to have servants. But then once he explained it, it made sense. Well, in 80/20 sales and marketing, I say there's three kinds of work. There's $10 an hour work, there's $100 an hour work, and there's $1,000 an hour work. And $10 an hour work is like cleaning your office or running errands. And $100 an hour work is solving a problem for a customer. And $1,000 an hour work is, making like really important decisions or negotiating things or whatever. And like the way an economy is supposed to work is that the person, you get rid of $10 an hour work so that you can do $1,000 an hour work. Because, okay, so let's talk about maids or servants. Okay, I have cleaning ladies that come over every Thursday and they clean the house, and we pay them, I don't know, $400 or $500 a month, and they come over every week and they clean the house. Well, my wife is always in a better mood when they leave because the house is beautiful, right? Okay. Secondly, if I made 10 phone calls and I wanted 10 other cleaning people to come over and bid the job, they would all be over, right? In like by tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Mrs. Marhsall, what can we do? People want that job. So if you don't really want to do something, you should hire somebody to do it. Like, think about it. I mean, I bill at a couple $1,000 an hour. Why on earth should I not hire a cleaning lady? And frankly, those cleaning ladies, they're probably working for, I don't know, 10 or 15 bucks an hour, whatever it is. Okay, if my time is worth more than, say, 30 or 40 bucks an hour, it's only logical that I would give that job to somebody else. Now, what you have to get okay with in your head is, I'm sitting here, I'm reading a magazine, and this lady is here with a vacuum cleaner vacuuming under my feet. Can I be okay with that? Well, you should be. You gave her the job. And it could be that you need to read that magazine so that you know the next industry trend, so that like it's all part of the food chain. Your job is to move up the food chain, and you are doing good when you do that because you create a job for somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. So you actually mentioned something once. It was pretty impactful. We're talking about offloading or outsourcing. And in that same scenario, like if you're making 30 or 40 an hour, you need to offload your $10 an hour stuff. And I think you made this comment. I taught it at a convention last year in an 80/20 seminar. It's like, don't try to predetermine what somebody else might want to do. Like, if you need somebody to mow the grass or vacuum under your feet while you read a magazine, put it out, because there's probably somebody in your neighborhood, or at least amongst your, like in your community, that is praying for an opportunity to earn an extra $200 a month so they don't lose their car, or they can pay childcare. Or they're at the rope's end, and you're withholding that as well.
Yes, and you're not, dude, you're not being excessively dramatic when you say that. Yeah, like somebody is praying for, and now when you start getting into discussions about outsourcing, everybody wants to, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to outsource my bookkeeping. I'm going to outsource my Google advertising. I'm going to outsource like all these different things. Well, what if you start with stuff you don't like doing around the house? The honeydew projects, hanging the picture on the wall, mowing the lawn, shoveling the snow, doing the laundry, maybe the cooking, the cleaning, right? There's all kinds of stuff like if you're an entrepreneur and you run a business and you are mowing your own lawn, shame on you.
Right. Right. And like unless that's your therapy, it's the thing you love to do.
Right. Right. Sure. That's fine. But
never, I built a list a few years ago. It was an Evernote list. It was called Suck Factor to Eliminate. And anytime I bumped into something in my home or my world that I said, that sucks, I'd write it on the list and I'd figure out how to get rid of it. And most of it was just little tasks around the house. Some were repetitive, some were one-offs. There were a couple of employees on there. We figured it all out. And that list is very short now, but I keep adding. But it's huge. There's a part B to that, or maybe this is part C, is once you've offloaded that stuff and you've freed up space both in your time and in your mind, how do you make sure that you productively occupy that and don't just, turn yourself out to pasture and go fallow? I mean, I don't want to pay somebody to mow my grass if I'm just going to gain 20 pounds because I'm not mowing my grass.
Okay, so I think a lot of people medicate themselves with meaningless activity. And I have this phrase I love to say: the reason you're checking your email right now, or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, is because you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think most people haven't really figured out what they want to do or like to do. So they're just doing things to fill time.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Okay. Now, what do I mean what you want to do or what you like to do? So I think one of the things that everybody needs to have in their life is what I call a holy discontent. There is something out there that is wrong in the world, and I'm going to fix it. Okay, it could be there's too many homeless people in Missoula, Montana, and every Saturday night I'm going to go volunteer at the PADS shelter. Or maybe it's some political issue or some poverty issue or whatever. Okay, but like, if you don't have a marked out space in your life for that, then what you will do is when life hands you frustration and disappointment, you'll go medicate yourself like, well, I think I'm just going to go watch a movie. I'm just going to have a beer and a bag of Ruffles. and that is the kind of barnacle behavior that makes you fat and lazy and purposeless, and it perpetuates itself. Yeah. And people get into addictions. That's why people get addicted to alcohol and stuff like, to some extent. I mean, that's even part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, kind of, when I mentioned earlier, we're talking about adult children, and my son said, Dad, you're like cooler now that I don't live at home. It was because there was no more laundry list, because like all the cool things that I want to share with my son, and like like wisdom or life experience or guidance, or like just hearing what he's interested in, we rarely got to that, because it was, you got to clean your room, you need to check your tire, did you check your oil, how much gas, it's like all this litany of just tasks that got in the way. And by the time we got through the tasks to get the good stuff, he was so frustrated with me that he didn't want to talk. So part of that's on me. But now, like you clear off the fluff to get to something that is truly important. I think that's very important, and something to be determined in advance. Because the first time I cut my workload, I cut from 65 hours a week or so down to about 25. I was like, wow, I've got all this free time. So I didn't have a plan for it. So I joined the board of this organization and this nonprofit and started volunteering time. Next thing you know, I was working 65 hours a week again, but I was only getting paid for 20. And I was like, it was fun and rewarding, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. So being deliberate in advance. Anyway, the next thing, so I want to shift up a few levels just to tactical. You've touched on some of this stuff, but I really want to know what, in your opinion, because you work with so many industries and so many different businesses. Some are, we got our roofing guy down in Virginia, and then you've got guys that they're running, they're running AdWords agencies and marketing agencies, or they're building, they're building empires. What's some of the low hanging fruit in an 80-20 world in business that people just simply overlook?
Well, so I think one of the biggest levers that exists is how you spend the first 30 to 60 minutes of your day. And the worst way to spend the beginning of your day is in an email box or on social media or like watching the news. Those are literally the worst ways to start your day. The best way to start your day is doing something thoughtful and contemplative and like planning your day. I start my day with a notebook and a pen and my cup of tea. Okay, so before I do anything else, I'm going to pray, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to center myself. If I had a dream last night, I'm going to write it down. If a thought came in the shower, I'm going to write that down. And I'm going to figure out what is the highest and creative best thing that I can apply to myself to. And then I'm going to do the $1,000 an hour work for the day at the beginning. And I'm sorting my, okay, $10,000, $100,000, $10,000 an hour work. I mean, if you can do $10,000 an hour work first thing in the morning, then do that then. And get that out of the way. And then, and only then do you start reacting to all of the other stuff. Because it satisfies your ego and your lizard brain to wake up in the morning and suddenly just be replying to emails and answering phone calls and like doing all this, but it doesn't get anything accomplished. It doesn't strategically move you to a better and better and better place. And I think this is probably 2 or 3 times more important than it was 20 or 40 years ago.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Because the world comes at you so fast, and the world is designed in every way you can imagine for you to react. And the future belongs to the 5% who are not reactive, but are actually being proactive and strategic.
That's huge. And you've been teaching for a while the concept of Renaissance time, which I think overlays that very well. But I mean, if you don't put the most important stuff first, it doesn't get done. And the sad part, like the lizard brain part of it, is it feels really good. You feel like you're so important when something blows up at the office. You're like, well, I got to fix that, and I got to respond to this, and something broke, and I can, and you're the miniature hero for your team or for your company or even for yourself. But you're honestly not getting anything done. So laying that up first. Could you, as we start winding down, would you just overlay that with Renaissance time?
So I realized a few years ago that we did not have enough words for work because there are very different kinds of work. And so I made this little quadrant, and it's like 4 quadrants and four ways that you can spend your time. So one of them is work ethic. Okay, so work ethic is I'm an attorney and I bill $300 an hour and I'm doing attorney client work for $300 an hour and I'm in my zone and it's in my specialty and I'm super productive. That's what I mean. Like, it's just in your wheelhouse. It's what you're trained to do, what you're good at. That's work ethic. Okay, then there's barnacles. Barnacles is $10 an hour work that seems productive, but is really far below your actual value as a person. And most of us degenerate into this as a bad habit. And it tends to just grow and grow. You have to scrape it off constantly, okay?
Okay.
Well, all right, then there's what we call sweet life, and that's just taking a day off, spending time with your family, Sunday, not doing any work, that sort of thing, or going on vacation. But then there's this fourth category that I call Renaissance time. And Renaissance time is unpredictably productive time. Okay, and that is exploratory time, which could occasionally lead to a big insight or something really exciting or new, but it works best when you don't put a burden of, okay, this has to pay.
Yeah.
Because then it's no fun. And most people don't make big discoveries when they're not having any fun.
Right.
And so just last week, I had a workshop that I was doing, and this guy was working on this project, and so it's like he's got all these projects, and he's got this one project, and it's his personal passion project in his company, and it might pay off. It might hit pay dirt, but so far it's been difficult, and they just haven't been able to figure out. And he goes, most people would just tell me to trash it because something inside me is telling me I just need to work on this thing. I said, okay, so take that project, put it in the category of Renaissance time, which is you are going to approach it as serendipitous exploration, and you are going to have fun with it. And you are not going to hang a burden of obligation of, oh, I got to grind away until this thing finally works. Make it fun and just give it space.
Ooh,
okay. Yeah. And that's a much better way of having discoveries than because inspiration never comes when your fists are clenched.
Right. It's almost always when you're doing something else. It's like processionary. You're going this way, but 90 degrees opposite of what you're doing is where the inspiration comes from. Renaissance time. Yeah. When you first introduced it, talk about, read something that was written pre-Gutenberg, like ideas that have withstood the test of time over millennia, I can't imagine anybody going back to my Twitter feed 1,000 years from now going, wow, let me see what he wrote. Like, ideas are not going to last. They're like gnats in the summer around a picnic, but things that have been around for a long, long time, not only does it give you room for exploration, but it also is sharpening the saw and enriching your mind with ideas of verity, of maybe the literature of eternity, not the color, the flavor of the week kind of stuff. And that has been the most important part, for me is like, I just think about the problems that come in the day in a different manner when I have a perspective of a millennium, not of a week. So
yes. And that is, if you read something written before Gutenberg every day, that's the stuff it survived the burning of Alexandria and the sacking of Rome, and it survived the centuries. That is the antidote to the incessant attention-grabbing clickbait headline, immediate low-value squirrel cage that most people find themselves in. And you start to see, Plato was talking about this, or somebody in the Bible was talking about this 3,000 years ago, and I just saw it yesterday in the office. That thing that happened again, and you start to distinguish the things that are going to last compared to the things that are just going to go away. And then, I've always been fascinated with enduring art. Like, I've always, like, music, there is some music that ages very badly in the 80s that nobody wants to listen to anymore unless you're in a really weird mood, right? And there's other stuff that, like, people are going to be listening to still in 50 years.
Yeah.
And sure. I think the only way that you learn to make enduring art is by immersing yourself in enduring art. It's not like there's a formula for it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, we're running out of time. I want to make sure that we stay on task. Thank you very much for being on the show, Perry. It's always great to catch up with you. It's good to see you. But this is important life stuff, and it's, you know, like principles versus tactics. Like, you get the principles right, it's easier to travel with the river than swim upstream. Doesn't matter what kind of boat you have. The boat or the floaty is the tactic, but the flow of the river is the principle that's going to carry you fast and far. So yes. Thank you for taking time to be with us and for sharing from, you know, your perspective and your wisdom. What's a good way for people to find out more about you and follow you?
If you like this interview, you should go to sell8020.com, and it'll offer you 80/20 sales and marketing for a penny plus shipping. That'll be $7 in the US. So it's about $10 less than Amazon, and you get some extra videos, you get some extra tools and resources, and you can watch how I sell and how I relationship build via email and other forms of media. If you go to sell8020.com, the book 80/20 Sales and Marketing will completely change your life. You'll never see the world the same way after you read that book.
I have to confirm that sentiment, because that was the tipping point for me in the 80/20 world. So I'll make sure that will be in the show notes. You don't have to remember it. Just click on it. There'll be a link that'll take you directly there, so you can get that book. I've got my copy here, and go a little bit deeper and enrich your life and build yourself some freedom. This is the 80/20 Sales and Marketing. That's not the 80/20 Sales. I don't even know the name of my own show, Perry. It's the 80/20 Service Business Podcast, but we're really wanting to help people learn to work less, make more, and have freedom. So thanks again for being on. I look forward to catching up with you next time.
Thank you, Sid.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.